Okay, so couple quick things before I begin. I'm using a brand new camera. I'm not using my webcam anymore. And I can't see myself in it. And I've messed around with the camera for a little bit already to try to see if I've got a good view, if it's turning up well. And the thing is, I can't see myself in the camera like I could with the webcam. So, but you're really not in here to see me. You're here to listen to the reading. So, yeah. With that being said, I hope this camera should be a lot better than my webcam. You should actually get a lot better quality in the voice and the hearing. So, that's a perk. With that being said, we're going to start chapter 14. Before we do, I want to, give warnings for torture and abuse by a grandparent and the murder of family members. And there's a warning for, it's not graphic, at least, but one character is kind of badly, gets his ass kicked in this one, so that's that. It's a pretty morbid chapter, but again, this is Abarat and Clive Barker. It goes hand in hand. I should body horror is a big thing, and you're going to start noticing that it's popping up. And this is one of the chapters where we're introduced to a character that has quite a bit of body horror going on with them. So, with that being said, I think I've warned for everything I have to warn about. If I haven't, and you want me to make a note in the description later on, tell me, and I will put it in there. With that being said, let's begin chapter 14, Carrion. Over his many years of service to Christopher Carrion, Mendelssohn Shape had come to know the geography of the 12th tower on the island of Gorgosium very well. He knew his way around the kitchens and the scrying rooms. He knew his way down through the vaults in the Black Chapel and through the rooms of tears. But today, when he returned to the tower with the news that he had lost everything, the key, mischief, and his accomplice in the theft, the girl called Candy, Shape was told by Carrion's lumpen-headed servant Gnaw that he was to report to a chamber he had never visited before, the great library close to the top of the tower. Dutifully he did so. It was the largest room he had ever entered in his life, a vast, round, windowless chamber with stacks of books rising perhaps 40 feet into the air. Waiting there for his master to arrive, Mendelssohn was not a happy man. He was dressed in a long, shabby coat that was lined with werewolf baby wool, but it didn't keep the cold from his marrow. His teeth wanted to chatter, but he kept them from doing so. It would not be good to show fear, he knew. Carrion would only be inspired to cruelty if he sensed that the creature he was talking to was afraid. Mendelssohn had witnessed Carrion's cruelties many times. Sometimes he'd come to this tower and it seemed there'd been somebody weeping or screaming or begging for mercy behind every door, all Carrion's handiwork. Even today, climbing the stairs to the great library, he'd heard someone behind the stones, sealed in forever in some dark, narrow space in the walls, calling out to him, sobbing for light, a piece of bread, mercy. But this was the wrong place to look for mercy, Mendelssohn knew. The vaulted ceilings of the 12th tower, which were painted with scenes designed to terrify, had looked down on many a dreadful scene, and none had ended, Mendelssohn was certain, with the granting of mercy. His footless leg was aching, but he did not dare sit down, in case carrion entered and caught him lounging. Instead, to pass the time, he went to one of the many tables in the library, stacked with books that had presumably been brought down from the shelves because they had caught Carrion's eye. One, set on a little lectern for easy reading, was a book Shape remembered from his childhood, Pin Coffin's Rhymes and Nonsenses. The book had been a favorite of his, containing many a rhyme and lullaby he still knew by heart, including the one he'd sung to the girl from the hereafter. It was open to a grim little nursery song he had forgotten, but now, reading it, he was enchanted anew. Scare baby, where do you run? Out in the graveyard to have you some fun, dancing with skeletons up from the ground, doing a jig on a burial mound. His lips moved as he scanned the words, and it brought back a distant memory of his mother, Miasma Shape, sitting with her three boys, Niz, Knot, and Mendelssohn, reading aloud from Pincoffin's opus. Oh, how he'd idolized his mother! He read on. Scare baby, horrid you are, with the wings of a bat and a face with a scar, the fangs of a vampire, the tail of a snake. You open your mouth, and the noise that you make is a song that the devil sings, bitter and loud. Tell me, my baby, was your mother proud? A song that the devil sings. That was a phrase that had lingered in his head over the years, though he had forgotten, until now, its source. He had many times wondered if he could ever hope to make such a song. He let a sound escape his throat now, a low, menacing growl that was magnified by the circular chamber. Oh, yes, that sounded like something to put fear into the hearts of his enemies. That was the noise, he thought to himself, that he would make when he found that wretched girl again, a sound so horrible her wits would crumble. He made a louder noise still, and from the top of the stacks of books, disturbed by the din, there swooped two winged creatures that descended to a point about 3 feet over his head, and there hovered. They were the size of vultures, and they had ashen, bloated faces, like monstrous cherubs. "What do you want?" he said, staring up at them. Their tiny, weightless eyes fixed on him for a moment. Then they seemed to decide that he was nothing of importance, and returned to their roots, climbing in wide spirals to the top of the stacks. Mendelssohn returned to the final verse of the poem. Scare baby, where do you run? Not out to the morning, not out in the sun. You live in my nightmares, you hide from the day, and there, little Shape. The one-footed man turned. The voice had come out of the shadows across the room. No door had opened to let the speaker in. He'd been there all the time, watching Mendelssohn, listening to him practice his growls. Mendelssohn didn't move. He simply studied the shadows, waiting for the appearance of the person who had addressed him. He knew, of course, who that somebody was. It was the Lord of Midnight himself, Christopher Carrion. "Sit," the voice said. "Please, Shape, sit. Are you fond of books?" The voice was deep and, even in the simplest of questions, was somehow tinged with despair. It was the voice of someone who had walked in the abyss. Mendelssohn could see him now faintly. He was an imposing figure, 6'6" or more, his long robes black, which was why he had blended in so well with the shadows. He walked toward Shape, and the candles on the table illuminated him a little. He had the most piercing eyes of any man Mendelssohn had ever met. They glistened in his bald, pale head. As always, he wore a collar of translucent material that resembled glass, which had been devised to cover the lower half of his head. It was filled with a blue fluid, which was now suddenly lit up by the presence of several snaking forms. They flickered in their fluid, some white as summer lightning, some yellow as sliced fat, weaving bright patterns around the Lord of Midnight's head. Plainly he took pleasure in their proximity, perhaps even a kind of comfort. When one of them brushed against his skin, he smiled, and that smile was so ghastly it made Mendelssohn want to run from the room. He knew from what Naw had told him why Carrion smiled that smile, and what those bright shapes were. Carrion had found a way to channel every nightmarish thought and image out of the coils of his brain, and bring them into this semi-physical form. He breathed the fluid. The flickering forms ran in and out of his mouth and nostrils, soaking his soul in his own nightmares. His voice, reverberating through this soup of dark visions, was tinged with the power of those nightmares. Their terror touched every syllable he spoke. The books, shape. Yes. Oh, yes, the books. I have books. A few. And what else do you have? Carrion said. The serpentine lights flickered around Midnight's head, his eyes fixed on Mendelssohn. Or don't have? You mean the key? Yes, of course. The key. What else would I mean? Lord, please forgive me. I don't have the key. Mendelssohn waited, fearing that Carrion would come at him, strike him, perhaps. But no, he just stood there, piercing shape with his hollow gaze. Go on, he said quietly. I found the men who stole it from you, John Mischief and his brothers. Yes, he escaped with the key to Ifrit and took a boat to the hereafter. I went after him and I sank the boat, and I thought I would have him. But the tide was with him. It carried him all the way to the other side. All the way to the hereafter? Carrion said, with a little touch of yearning in his voice. Yes. How is it there? He said, almost conversationally. I saw very little of it. I was trying to catch Mischief. Of course you were. You were doing your honest best, but he kept avoiding you. 8 heads are better than 1, eh? You were outnumbered. I was, Lord, Mendelssohn said, beginning to dare think that his master understood the hazards his servant Shape had endured to get all the way to the hereafter and back. Carrion went to the chairs in the chamber. He sat down in it and knitted his hands together lightly in front of him, as if in prayer. So, he said. So, tell me what happened. Oh, well, I almost caught up with him at Hark's Harbor. The harbor? I thought it was destroyed. There were some minor portions remaining, Lord. A lighthouse, a jetty. No ships? No ships. I think those that were scuttled are buried in the earth. Anyway, I saw none. So, go on. You went to the harbor and... He had an accomplice. Besides his brothers? Yes, a girl. A girl from the hereafter. Ah, he had an accomplice. And a girl to boot. Poor Shape. You didn't stand a chance. No, Lord. So he gave her the key. Did he? I don't know. Yes, possibly. Did he or did he not give her the key? Carrion asked, his voice subtly gaining in volume and menace. Mendelssohn looked at the floor. His teeth had begun to chatter, though he'd promised himself he would not let them. Look at me, Shape. Mendelssohn was afraid to do so. He kept his eyes downcast, like a man confronted by an enraged animal. I said, look at me! Shape seemed to feel something catch hold of his head and jerk it back, so that he was forced to look at the man sitting before him. An instant later, that same power pressed on his shoulders, driving him down onto the mosaic floor with such force that his knee bones cracked like whips. Carrion's face looked skeletal, the marks around his mouth, where, according to rumor, his grandmother Madame Motley had once sewn up his lips, like the teeth of a skull, the arid flesh above the line of the fluid close to mummified. Only his eyes had any real life, and that was an insane life, crazed beyond recall. There was nothing in the world Mendelssohn's Shape wanted more than to be out of the library at that moment. You failed me, Carrion said. His voice seemed to resonate in Mendelssohn's head, so that Shape was suddenly and sickeningly aware of the form of his own skull, of the death's head he carried around, just out of sight behind his skin. I'm sorry. I did all I could. I swear. What was the name of the girl? I heard only one name. Candy. Carrion's upper lip curled at the very idea of sweetness. Would you know her again if you saw her? Yes, of course. Then it seems I must let you live, Mendelssohn. You have dealt with this girl. Presumably you know something of her nature? Yes, I believe I do, Shape said through his chattering teeth. He wanted desperately to look away from Carrion's face, but the Lord of Midnight held him there. I think she probably has the key, don't you? But Mischief gave it to her. I didn't see such a thing, Lord. But he will have done so. If I may ask, what makes you so sure? Because he's like you. He's tired of the chase. He wants somebody else to be the object of my eye, at least for a little while. Carrion paused for a moment and looked up at the ceiling. The cherubic beasts, roused from their roosts by the sound of the torment below, were circling in the library vault, enjoying the spectacle. Finally, Carrion said, You have to go back and find me this girl. But, Lord... Yes? She came here. Carrion rose from his seat. You saw her here? No, I saw the tide carry her away. So she could have drowned. She could be in the belly of a mantizak. He came at Mendelssohn finally, his hands raised, filled with a kind of terrible relief that he was getting what he deserved. Shape felt himself lifted up, though Carrion made no contact with him. He was thrown across the nearest table, and the books, including Pencoffin's rhymes, went flying. Mendelssohn was held down by an invisible force, so strong it kept his breath from coming freely. He heard his breastbone creak. "Listen to me, Shape," Carrion said. "Your brothers are dead for their failures, and you will join them in the lime pit if you do not succeed in this last venture. Do you understand?" Mendelssohn could barely manage a nod. "Find me this Candy. If she's dead, find me her body. I can interrogate the dead if I need to. I want to know what kind of creature she is. The tide carried her, you say?" "It seemed that way," Mendelssohn said. "That's strange. After all that happened, I'm sure Our Lady Isabella would drown most souls rather than carry them here." Carrion took his eyes off Shape for the first time in several minutes, and Shape felt the weight of the power upon him relax somewhat. "There is something strange here," Carrion said, half to himself. "Something mysterious." "How will I find her, Lord, in all of the islands?" "You will have help for that," Carrion said, his wrath apparently quenched. "Go down to the kitchens. Eat. Wait for word from Gnaw. I will see you again when I have some clue." "Yes, Lord." "A girl, eh?" Carrion said, as though amused by the notion. Then he moved away and was enveloped by the darkness. The bone-cracking weight removed from his chest, Shape rolled off the table, gasping for breath. In the vaulted ceiling above, the vile cherubs were still circling, chattering to one another as they went, excited by the violence they'd just witnessed. Mendelssohn ignored them. He hauled himself up to his foot and stump, and waited a few moments until the ache in his chest subsided. Then he hobbled to the door and headed away down to the kitchens, promising to himself that he would burn his few books when he went home, for fear that they would put him in mind of the terrors he had just endured. And that's all for that chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I did good with the voices. With that being said, I won't take any more of your time up. And if this turns out to have worked very well, then I'll try to do one tomorrow. See you later.